Deltarune has a lot of analysis and theory videos that have gone into depth about the characters, themes, gameplay changes and whatnot. For example, Chris and the player are two separate entities with different responsibilities and desires. Rouse has an unclear motive for sealing the fountain and is hiding important plot points from everyone unless absolutely necessary. Noelle studied the occult and so is therefore capable of magic, able to immobilize Birdly where the human forces Chris to force Noelle to use Snowgrave. That's all been discussed and all of this analysis is incredibly important for our understanding of the game. But nobody talks about Shawn. He's one important character that goes relatively unnoticed compared to the rest of them. Now yes, he has far less dialogue, barely makes an appearance, but the dialogue they do hold is very suspicious. While everyone has their eyes on Rouse for being suspicious and possibly evil, a murderer, I think the real suspicion lies with this crusty old cat. In this video, I'm going to analyse Shawn to the core in the best way that I can, from his looks, dialogue, incredible knowledge, all in chronological order from chapter 1 to 2, and understand what we can learn about him, the Fun Gang, Lightners, Darkners, and perhaps even the fates of this universe. As we see the cat made of cotton for the first time, we begin to notice that he's made of even more than cotton as he's using a button to cover one of his gaping open eye sockets, which somehow has the mechanisms to be used as an eye. Not to mention the deep scar he has on his face, a sewn together mouth and a deformed nose. It's clear that Shawn's been through a lot over the years because he's not in good shape. He still has another eye that needs to be fixed with a button. This is no ordinary shopkeeper. That button is probably part of the odds and ends he has collected over the years, but he claims to have no attachment to anything that he collects. He simply does it to pass the time to avoid going mad like everyone else. He's really calling poor Top Chef mad. You see, he only went mad after Susie took his cake, which we proceeded to use in the Jevil fight. Talk to him a bit more and he tells you how Darkners looked up to Lightners as gods, as protectors, as creators, those who gave us purpose in his own words. Until one day they were all locked away in this prison. So far the Dark World hasn't looked like a prison to our main characters. I mean, everyone's been having the time of their lives, much more so than in the real world. Susie's totally not desperate to return to the Dark World because she wants to escape from her terrible life of being very poor, having a rough family which is reflected by her rough demeanour, and not being able to make any friends until she entered the world with a significant someone.
Embittered, the king took up arms and aims to take revenge upon the Lightners that left us behind. Of course, even among his troops, some still distantly hope the Lightners will return.
This sounds a lot like another great game we all played, except this king is a massive dickhead. He tries to tell us sealing the fountain makes no difference to him, but I don't think this is the case. Sure, he does say that due to his condition, which is reflected by his appearance like I mentioned earlier, neither light nor dark holds a future for him, but he was originally a court magician, cared about Jevil, and knows a lot about the Dark World and its inhabitants. There's certainly a degree of attachment there, and hopefully we'll be able to see his nihilism fade away if we manage to restore balance to light and dark on our adventure. That's all he has to say about the fountain, until after we talk to his old friend Jevil, whom he has a great interest with. Perhaps he has the most interest for him out of any other character so far. He begins to show more interest, as he warns that it could be troublesome if Jevil was left alone, but at the same time is adamant that whatever happens will not matter in the end, which I think most people can gather after playing chapter 2 is probably nonsense. Here's a question for you, Shawn. If this whole ordeal with Jevil really didn't matter to you, then why are you giving me a tip for how to find the broken key part? And once we do open the door to Jevil's maximum security cell, Shawn is excited and wishes that he could watch. For whatever reason he cannot. Perhaps Shawn can no longer walk due to the condition he's in, or maybe it's because since Shawn was the one who locked Jevil away, they can't bear to see him again, or vice versa. We don't really know yet. After you finally defeat Jevil after 15 tries, Shawn tells you all about Jevil's relationship with him before he lost his mind. One day Jevil was the court jester, Shawn the court magician. One day Jevil met a strange someone, lost his mind, and started seeing the world as a game, saying things that didn't completely make sense, but didn't completely not make sense. Shawn essentially started telling us that Jevil was seeing the world as a game and the people as its participants after meeting that strange someone, which is reflected by the fact that Jevil knows about HP amongst other things. Shawn also mentions that Jevil was the only one who matched me in the games we used to play, and if we refer to games as battles like Jevil did when we fought him, then Shawn sounds pretty powerful. Perhaps more powerful than Jevil himself. Jevil was only able to match Shawn, not defeat them outright. I also wonder if Shawn only became pessimistic and indifferent when Jevil started saying things that didn't completely make sense. We don't know what his mindset was like before Jevil went insane. Secondly, I imagine locking away a fellow companion who Shawn watched go insane was not good for his mental state at all. Perhaps a part of Shawn really did get locked away. In Jevil's own words, the strange words from Jevil are stuck inside Shawn's cotton, allowing him to view the world darker yet darker. Based on what we know, it is possible that his negative view of the world is what has allowed him to become so indifferent with whatever ends up happening to it. He even ponders over the thought that his life could have a little more purpose purpose if they never had to lock Jevil up. Just maybe. Furthermore, after watching a video by Jara J on who is the Roaring Knight in Deltarune, he very briefly mentions Shawn and points out the difference between the Strange Knight with text coloured red and a Strange Someone. This Strange Someone being the entity that met Jevil. We know it wasn't the Knight who met Jevil because Shawn differentiates between the two as the text is different, with the Strange Knight being coloured in red and the Strange Someone being completely normal, which is likely a deliberate action by Toby Fox to show that there are two characters we haven't met who are affecting the story in this game in different ways. The best thing about Shawn so far is that he tells us things no other character knows about. He knows about life in the Dark World before the Knight arrived and before Jevil lost his mind, and as we'll find out soon in chapter 2, we will begin to see how much this guy really knows. You defeated him? You really defeated him? I see. Perhaps you three may truly be heroes after all. But Jevil was just a taster for your face from now on. One day soon, you too will begin to realise the futility of your actions. Ha ha ha. At that time, feel free to come back here. I'll make you tea, and we can toast to the end of the world. In chapter 2, everyone from the first Dark World is nicely placed inside our castle town. Top Chef now has his own bakery, Malleus can make us cool new weapons, the jigsaw pieces have this cool tutorial room with challenges you can try to brush up your bullet hell skills on, which I personally love, and Shawn hasn't changed a bit. He's the same old cat who's now happy to see everyone all in one room together. And right off the bat, Shawn talks about the shadow crystal we got from Jevil. That crystal. It's nearly invisible, but you've been holding it this whole time. Here, I'll take it off your hands and appraise it. Incredible! To think he had a shadow crystal. Call it a premonition, but I get the feeling you may find more of these. If you continue to defeat strong adversaries like him, that is. If you can gather more shadow crystals, bring them here. I'm sure I can stitch together something incredible for you. I find it pretty strange that Shawn took the shadow crystals off us, just like that. It's difficult to trust a shopkeeper who we've barely seen in the game, who happens to know all sorts of hidden and worrying knowledge about the Dark World. Hold on to these shadow crystals, which he describes as a premonition if we find more of these. I'm not saying Shawn is evil. To be honest, he wouldn't make a very good villain. It's just unclear what his motive is behind the shadow crystals. He's been pretty apathetic and nihilistic throughout the majority of the game, but now he shows a great interest in the shadow crystals to the point where he wants to take it off us. It's just a bit unorthodox of him. As we find out later, the strong adversary he is referring to is of course Spamton, or Spamton Neo, who is not that strong by the way. But of course, there's more. If by the end of chapter 2 you return to the castle town having defeated Spamton but not Jevil, you therefore only have one shadow crystal. However, Shawn questions this notion. Are you sure you didn't defeat the clown, he states? According to him, as long as you have defeated that enemy in the past, then perhaps, even now, a crystal might turn up somewhere close. And lo and behold, a shadow crystal lies right where you and Susie first fell on the left side of the castle town. This could mean that Shawn is aware of different dimensions where different stories of the Legend of Deltarune is carried out, or in video game terms, save files. He may not be aware of the literal existence of save files, but he knows the concept exists. When Shawn refers to the past, he is referring to one of the player's previous save files where the player has defeated Jevil. You can't see it, so perhaps you didn't notice. Didn't you defeat him? Didn't you defeat Jevil? Here, I'll take that crystal. Now you have collected 2 of them. Huzzah! But that's not all. If you have recruited at least 9 enemies from the cyber world and talked to Shawn without having any shadow crystals, he will be hopeful that life is growing in the castle town, which is nice. And he also was happy to see the queen again, meaning he knew who the queen was. But that's not the crazy part. By the by, it's growing late, isn't it? You should hurry home once you finish your business here. You don't want to get caught when the sun goes down. At first, I didn't understand what he meant by this, but then I think I have one possible reason. When Chris rips their soul out of their body so they can be free to do as they please, they make sure they don't get caught. Furthermore, this always happens at nighttime. This probably means that Shawn knows about Chris ripping their soul out of their body when the sun goes down. I mean, what else would he possibly be referring to here? I haven't been able to think of anything else. If you haven't recruited at least 9 enemies, he does not say this, but I haven't been able to figure out how this rule links to the story currently. And we're not done there yet. Here's what happens if you give Shawn Spamton's Shadow Crystal after already giving them Jevil's from chapter 1. Well, what have we here? You managed to find another Shadow Crystal. Oh, is that so? That salesman had found the crystal in the old machine? I wonder if perhaps, long ago, that old machine was very important to someone. A certain lightner perhaps. Or maybe it's just a hunch. If you remember from talking to Swatch after defeating Spamton Neo, he confirms that the machine, or robot, was the embodiment of a lightner's dream, which he helped the lightner create, as the lightner was splashing colour from the motion of their hand. And if we remember all the way back in Undertale, Nabstablook's cousin ended up becoming Mettaton, and therefore Mettaton Neo. Both Mettaton and Spamton both have Neo at the end of their name, and there are certain similarities between the Spamton Neophyte and the Mettaton Neophyte, not just through the gameplay, but also even in the music. It's very cool to see how Toby Fox links the two characters together. Anyways, the point of all of this evidence is that the certain lightner Shawn refers to is likely the nobody we speak to in town, aka Mettaton. Shawn also understands how important the robot is to the nobody, as it was an embodiment of their dream, that dream likely being the desire to entertain and be famous like they were in Undertale. Shawn knows about this certain lightner, even though there is no evidence of him being in the cyber world of us where Spamton used the robot to try to fulfill his own devilish desires. How does he know? Don't act like it was just a hunch, Shawn, after everything you've said that other characters haven't. I'm sure you know exactly what's going on with that old machine. You have collected 2 shadow crystals, but don't let your guard down. I feel your next opponent may be, in reality, it may be impossible to win, unless you use the power of the Shadow Mantle. Here, it may look like an old scrap of cloth, but... I can't find it. Did someone take it? Well now, there goes your one chance of victory. Unfortunately, without the Shadow Mantle, at 2 you may remain. Fate is approaching, and it is not on your side. The closest to the Shadow Mantle that we know about is the Sky Mantle, an unused armor item that protects against electric and holy attacks. There is, of course, a church in the hometown, which is a possible place for another dark fountain to open up, so this unused item may be used for a dark world inside the church. That's about all we know though. Shawn did mention that the Shadow Mantle may look like an old scrap of cloth, which might mean that the Shadow Mantle is a weapon equipped by Rouse, as cloth is the closest thing to a scarf. The word mantle means something that covers, envelops, or conceals in this context, or a loose sleeveless coat worn over outer garments, or the role or appearance of an authoritative or important person, possibly meaning that the Shadow Mantle could be some kind of invisibility cloak. For what use it may have is currently unknown, but if someone has truly taken it off Shawn, then we may run into the character who has the Shadow Mantle in a later chapter. We have no reason to believe Shawn is lying, so this may well be the case. A few other points worth noting about Shawn. In the abandoned classroom, there is a battered purple stuffed animal with one yellow eye on the counter, resembling Shawn. There's no way it represents anything else, which means that like most darkners, Shawn's existence comes in the form of an item, unlike Rouse, who's a very different type of darkner, but that's been covered many times by others already. In the Japanese version, Shawn uses the personal pronoun atashi, an old-fashioned pronoun often used by elderly men, so Shawn's usage of it could possibly be an indicator of age. And finally, Shawn is the only shopkeeper to never appear outside of their shop, and the reason for this is unknown. This could be because Shawn is old and worn down enough to the point where he can no longer move out of his shop. However, one of the lightners in Chapter 1 asks Shawn to come and say goodbye to the fun gang, but Shawn reportedly showed no interest, implying that he is able to travel elsewhere. He just chooses not to. The only thing left to think about is what role Shawn will play in Deltarune's story going forward. Well, firstly, it's unlikely that Shawn will be a villain of some kind because he hasn't hinted at doing anything malicious in his life. Rather, he's done the opposite by being a friend to Jevil and playing games with him. He's also quite nihilistic, as we established, so he doesn't have the motive to do something evil, or good for that matter. He doesn't seem to have a motive. Back in Undertale, Sans would occasionally talk to you about his personality, the people around him, and give important fighting tips as well as some story hints. Shawn does pretty much the same thing. He just does it in a very different fashion. For one, he's a shopkeeper that doesn't physically follow you around. 2, his demeanor is more serious and nihilistic than Sans was. Secondly, both Sans and Shawn have deep knowledge about their respective games, and have shared this knowledge in bite-sized chunks where appropriate. Considering all of this, Shawn is likely going to continue to play the role as an overseer, a character watching from the distance as 3 heroes attempt to complete an interesting prophecy whilst giving advice and sharing knowledge as they do it. I think it would be pretty boring if Shawn followed the same behaviour at the end of every chapter though, so it would make sense for Toby Fox to switch up how Shawn behaves as the story progresses, kind of like how Jevil and Spamton both behave differently and play play different roles in their respective chapters. Maybe we will discover someone or something that tells us about Shawn's past, for example. It would be very cool to see Shawn be a boss of some kind in the Snowgrave route at some point. We know that Shawn is just as, and possibly more powerful than Jevil, so seeing his potential power go to waste and not be shown in the game would be a letdown. Whatever ends up happening in the next chapters, however Toby Fox breaks our hearts, and whatever fate of the beloved characters are, we can be sure that Shawn will be waiting. He will be waiting for us to give a lesson on our journey, on the futility of our actions, and a toast to mark the end of the world for which we may or may not be responsible for. Until that day, this has been everything you need to know about Shawn, with DFV signing out.